Hey, everybody. Welcome back. I'm Susan Lindner, your host of the Innovation Storyteller Show. Today, we're going to have a little walk down memory lane, for me at least, with my guest, Alex Trotta. Alex and I met first and foremost at a place called Venture Out New York. And we're going to talk about how we introduce innovation in all different kinds of settings and places, right? Especially in the financial services world. As you know, this podcast is dedicated to helping innovators like you understand not just new and important ways of innovating within your respective organizations, but also how we tell the stories to get people on board with the big idea. We do this so that you get the resources, the runway, and recognition that you deserve for your breakthrough ideas. And sometimes those ideas are products and services. Those are the big shiny ones. But sometimes it's business model. Sometimes it's process. Sometimes it's whole new ways of looking at the innovation horizon that we haven't before. And that's why I'm really excited that Alex is joining me today. We're going to talk about some of these different ways that we introduce innovation and the components of innovation that really make programs internally work, especially at large organizations. So Alex Trotta has over 14 years of product and innovation experience, ranging from companies like Citibank and MasterCard and Goldman Sachs and Moody's, typical mom and pop small business financial services companies that you may or may not have heard of, sure. He has an expertise in advising business leaders on product market fit and go-to-market strategies. He loves synthesizing emerging technology trends and communicating strategic initiatives to global leadership while impacting the bottom line. Very important. There is no innovation without value at the end of the sentence, right? He excels in bringing new ideas to market and creating processes that accelerate value and velocity across product and engineering teams. Alex, my friend, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
So, this is a fantastic conversation we're about to have because you and I have gone through a similar trajectory in terms of starting off working and helping young entrepreneurs, right? Emerging entrepreneurs really begin to understand product market fit, go to market strategy, et cetera. And then shifting into big corporations who also need guidance on these kinds of processes, bringing innovation into places where maybe it already exists, but maybe it needs to be fine-tuned or upgraded or innovated itself. So why don't you tell us how you got into the innovation space?
Yeah, absolutely. Once again, thanks for having me. I always love catching up with you, and now we're doing this, so I'm excited by it. So the early part of my career, I worked for a series of different startups and almost had different types of odd jobs, you could even say. But always knew that I wanted to work in more of an entrepreneurial, self-starter type of environment. And so working for those kind of series of different companies led me to where you and I met at Venture Out. And originally I was looking for more of like a venture capital type space. And Venture Out seemed to kind of blend what I was looking for in venture capital with more of an accelerator. And so that's what Venture Out was, is it was a program where we ran week-long intensive accelerators where we would help companies from abroad expand to the US. So take startups in Germany, for example, that are looking to expand their businesses to the US. And so that was my first kind of foray going from startups or small businesses and then slowly looking at, all right, where does the connection or the blend occur where now you're a small organization and you're trying to expand your business or sell into some of these larger organizations, level up, as you could say. And so what's great is I use that knowledge and that experience that I had garnered over my previous experience as well as the time at Venture Out to then level up myself and actually bring myself to work at Citibank, where we were working on a global accelerator, is really the first programming experience I had. And so that was the general progression, I would say, into innovation. Was first it was small businesses and small companies and startups, to then helping other startups, and then recognizing that there's an opportunity to be entrepreneurial, sometimes called entrepreneurial, at more of these larger organizations in different types of innovation groups.
Yeah. So let's take them chronologically because you've worked in so many amazing kind of marquee financial services companies that really have a reputation for innovation as well. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the projects that you've worked on and of course the stories that you told to get people on board with these shifts?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first big one was Citibank. And it was not only a level up for me kind of in my career, but it was also an opportunity to go and be in the belly of the beast. This is a large organization that is innovative, but the pockets of innovation kind of vary as you look at a company that is 300,000 people large across pretty much every continent on the planet. And so, where do you find that innovation and how do you really drive impact? And so, the team that I was on was focused specifically on an accelerator program. And we worked closely with the public sector team, so the government, the team that worked closely with other international governments. And the purpose was is we were going to try and find startups that played a role in generating either integrity or clarity or efficiency within just the money movement space. And so this could be a biometrics company. This could be a company just creating clear, end-to-end clarity around where money's going, if it's being transferred abroad. And so we set this goal of going out to different businesses and trying to say, how can we find as many businesses as possible, and then whittle this down. And so the first kind of message that was sold to the public sector group was, hey, right now you want to find some of these successful businesses out there in the market. We're going to bring in a team, and I was one of those members,
Mhm.
where it's somebody who has already been boots on the ground, has experience working with both startups domestically and abroad. And we believe that with our network and our relationships, we can go out and we can find those companies. And then separately, we identified and said, because we've also been experienced of selling or helping smaller organizations sell into these larger organizations, now that we're actually within the business, we believe that we can go out and also find the product teams or technology teams within the organization that are ripe and excited to bring in kind of this outside innovation approach.
Yeah.
And so that was the first kind of messaging or strategy that we said is we said we have this kind of small, nimble team with the right different types of capabilities and experience where we believe we can source and then drive impact very quickly, with the correct parameters involved.
So, that first step, right, of getting the whale, right, to say yes to the goldfish is no small shakes. And many organizations have experienced tons of failures around trying to do just that. I remember talking to one of the innovators at Coca-Cola who told me that we have crushed every startup we sought to bring in here. We've murdered them accidentally, like smothered them with our regulations, our desire for localization, our need for high level security before we even start. And, watch that go out the window. How did you find the evangelist, the internal champion for these startups when they're not even tested within the organization yet?
So it's a great question. So there were a few things we did. One thing is we used the weight and the strength of the individuals that we were working with at the public sector group, and even in other parts of the organization to really garner that support and that notoriety.
Mm,
And so what do I mean by this? Well, one of the top individuals in the organization in the public sector group was a sponsor of this program. Additionally, we went to partners who also wanted to put their name and their brand on this global accelerator, and it was a global accelerator. We had over 1,000 applications to this program, and this is back in the mid 2010s too. So still, I would say a little bit early as far as this ability to reach across the globe and really try and find startups ripe for being ingested into a larger organization. And so one of the things was that kind of senior support, that leadership support. The other thing is we partnered with companies like Facebook, Microsoft, IBM, MasterCard, PwC. So we had these other large, big name brands where even you internally, as somebody who is saying, hey, I think we have an opportunity to impact our business more, or I might be open to partnering with one of these external companies, it actually gave you as an employee in Citibank some value in saying, I'll raise my hand, I'll be a part of this because I'm going to get that halo effect
Mm,
of these different large institutions so that I can be a success story 6 months, 12 months down the line that says, yes, I was one of those departments or divisions that took one of these companies in and worked with them. So sometimes it is about uh, aligning yourself with somebody's own like self-fulfilling prophecies of sorts of trying to, you know, elevate their name or their star within the organization that by adding these other external companies, it that halo effect affected Citibank itself and the accelerator, but it also drove a little deeper and garnered a lot of interest and a lot of eyeballs from people who may not have necessarily picked up on that originally.
interesting. So maybe we need to add that to the criteria is there a halo effect? Because you really need to have people who are going to fight the good fight for these startups when they start getting inside and they start being CC'd on emails with 22 other people when there's only 4 guys in the company to start off with, right?
Well, so there's two things about that. So one, you're absolutely right that it's very interesting that what happens when that halo effect goes away or never was there to begin with. Is
Mm.
somebody who signed up at the beginning actually going to be willing to carry something through if they don't see that it's still a positive influence on their career and their progression in the organization? And so I think the benefit is when you have such a big bang affect and experience an event, and in this scenario, multiple events that kind of continue to snowball and grow, that it takes that halo effect or that momentum and carries it much further than if you didn't have something that was as big a bang. You know, I will and I do not want to be disparaging of like hackathons. I think hackathons are great, and I think it's a way to definitely drive new ideas and togetherness and camaraderie and rapport across different teams in an organization. So, and we'd actually participated in a hackathon ourselves as well. So I do think it's of value, but if a hackathon is the prize is we might build your idea, that's great, but that might be very limited. Now, if the prize is, hey, we might fund companies coming in and partnering with you to build out a better product. And oh, by the way, it's also going to have Facebook, IBM, MasterCard, some of these others also associated with it. They're going to continue to serve as, you know, fuel for a longer duration of time. I think you find that a lot more people are attentive and interested in participating.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Thinking about how to keep that participation level high too over time. It's not a small thing. So take us from there. So tell us about some of the impact that these startups had at Citi.
Yeah, so what I'm going to do is flip it a little bit and take us to the point where we went from these 1,000 companies, and then how did we actually whittle them down to the companies that we started to work with? And so we went through a pretty rigorous evaluation criteria, video interviews, actually testing of their products, and even some demoing of the products, and even getting some of the potential fit departments within Citibank to look at the businesses and actually play around with them. So to understand if there's actually even an appetite. And so from there, we got down to a total of 90 companies that then participated in 6 different demo days around the world. So the other exciting part, which is sometimes hard to do because this costs money, but if you're a department that was looking to benefit from one of these, you know, innovative companies, you might have gotten an opportunity to travel to Abu Dhabi or Mexico City or Buenos Aires, where one of these demo days was taking place. And so, while many businesses may not just have the funding to do that with an accelerator, I think that's another carrot to get participation and engagement. And so what we did is after those demo days, then the question was, how do you then take those companies and identify who might be a quality fit to go into the organization? And then how do you jump that chasm or gap to actually get them in.
Mm.
And that I would say is the next step of something that took persuasion or engagement is there is an onboarding process in any one of these large institutions, and anybody who is sold into a big business, whether they're a small startup or even a large organization like Salesforce. I can tell you that I remember there was a Salesforce engagement when I was at Citibank that the the deal still wasn't signed, and they were already trying to implement the product. And I think it was took 3 or 4 years, something like that. And so it's just the trudging through to get it done. There's a lot of evaluation that goes into it. Well, if you're a 20-person company in Germany, do you have the ability to jump through all those hoops and even last 3 or 4 years to actually be onboarded? Sometimes yes, and that's great, but sometimes no. And so we identified that and we said, how can we make it faster? And so what we realized is we needed to engage the control functions, because that's usually what are the big blockers. Your information security, data security, third-party management, third-party risk, the legal. And how do you potentially get those teams to not ease their restrictions, but just recognize that maybe there's an opportunity to distill down what questions are asked or what bars need to be reached?
Mm.
And so, just another kind of nugget is we had already engaged those teams before we started sectioning off or whittling down the total number of participants that we had in this accelerator program. So they were engaged early on in the process. And what that allowed us to do is then approach them and say, hey, you could be a part of this first time, what we called HOV lane, or HOV, being able to fast track onboarding of some of these potential startups. And that could be another kind of feather in your cap, is something that you participated in and an innovation that you participated in. And what was really beneficial is using that word innovation, people gravitate toward it. Sometimes it's looked at as a little bit of a dirty word now. I still don't think it is, but
Where did that come from, you
especially
think? Where does that kind of being a dirty word thing come from? Is it because of risk and failure and that kind of lack of tolerance for that risk?
I think it doesn't have there's nothing tactile about it. It doesn't feel tangible.
Mm.
It feels fictitious. Innovation, they're doing it over there. Innovation, it's hard to kind of crystallize what that actually means. And I think that's why it's become a little bit of a dirty word. And I
Mm.
also think it just means different things to different people and different organizations. Something you touched on a little bit earlier that I do just want to kind of pick out real quick is you you talked about how innovation organizations, like, things die on the vine, sometimes die on the vine very quickly, or initiatives get cut it's the first thing that get cut. The old age joke used to be marketing is the first thing that gets cut. Now it's innovation.
Mm.
It's like, oh, that's the first place. And it's bewildering to me because innovation should be in some ways replaced with R&D. So you're telling me that when cuts need to come, the first place you're going to cut from is the place that could potentially birth a new idea or a new ability to win in the market where your competitors might not have it. And so that just seems counterintuitive to any business that's looking to grow. And let's be real, we're in a capitalistic society, so everybody's looking to grow. And so why would you cut somebody's legs off of that growth opportunity? So sometimes when I talk about innovation, I actually use R&D because it is research and development, and I would say R&D and exploration, because you're exploring what's beyond the horizon, what's next, where are other places you think you can win in the market compared to your competitor. And so I'll just bring it back to there are businesses that I've spoken to who are like, we're gonna create a new innovation division or innovation team. And then they say, we're going to do corporate venture, and we're going to do an accelerator, and we're going to do a hackathon, and we're going to do this new idea and that new idea. And they spread themselves too thin too quickly. And then they do die on the vine. They do die very quickly because nothing is given its space and its room to grow. And then let's be real, it's funding. So if you try and fund those 5 initiatives, everybody's going to start asking where the ROI is on each of those initiatives much earlier, versus if you condense your funding, condense your focus, and say, we're going to go out and we're going to deliver a very great accelerator for this department. And here's the metric we're going to use to signal whether this is being successful or not. And I've noticed that when businesses are much more focused, and when they also communicate this idea of innovation as a company-wide focus, versus just this team over here should do it, you see that there's a lot less intention in cutting your innovation as the first step in trying to save money, in a down year.
So, it's funny because during the pandemic, when I started this podcast, a lot of people who had been my guests were calling me back saying, "Hey, do you know anybody who's hiring? The innovation division has been shut down." And I thought, well, that's a stock I should be shorting because it's such short-term thinking. And I get sometimes you have to corral the troops, you have to hunker down, you have to block and tackle and all of those cliched metaphors. But it was astounding to me because we know historically that all great innovation takes place in the midst of great crisis, really. And so if you're not investing at that time, frankly, when it's cheapest, then you're really missing out on a cycle. And I do think people are terrified of attaching themselves to some kind of initiative that fails. And I always think it's the reflection on the company itself rather than the individual that doesn't have the tolerance for some kind of failure, because frankly, it's how all things become great.
So I agree with you, and it's why I I do, when I speak to other teams and other people who are still in innovation and specifically corporate innovation, I say you want to have metrics that allow you to determine if you're going to take another path or continue on your current path at shorter intervals. And you need to have the story. And if you do end up with a failure, you need to be prepared to say, hey, leadership, if we end up with a failure, here's the benefit that we're going to get from that failure. Here's the learning. Because a
Mm,
lot of times I also see teams just running towards a certain destination, and the metric that they're evaluating their team on is how many meetings did we have, how
oh,
many how many new ideas did we come up with, how many papers did we write or documents did we write on something. And that I, I don't think drives value at the end of the day, because I mean, we're not in a public forum, but I would say, how many people, raise your hand, how many people have read like more than one white paper that your company has produced? And it's like you're going to see 90% of people's hands not be raised, because no one ultimately reads, or few people read this unless that's your specific job to do so. And I think if you can create a story where success or failure, this is going to still benefit the organization, then you're going to find that you'll get that funding cycle again and again to go and explore new things. Now, the last thing I will say on that is, as closely as you can try and attach yourself to revenue of some component, the better you are. So even if the project itself that you're working on isn't generating revenue, but it will feed information, knowledge, or learning to something that does generate revenue, then you're going to find that there's deeper attention and positive attention put to what you're focused on, versus someone just waiting till whatever you're working on dies out so that
mm,
they can move on to something else.
right. Yeah. Well, let's keep going. So certainly Citi is one place, MasterCard is another, Goldman's another where you've been. Tell us another project that you were working on that was really interesting, fascinating for you.
Yeah, so I actually think I'm going to skip over MasterCard, just because. So while I was at MasterCard, I worked on something called MasterCard Experience Centers. These were physical spaces, almost think interactive movie theaters in different MasterCard offices around the world, where sales, customer success, and even our executive team, and all the way up to Ajay Bongo when he was still CEO of the company, and now Michael Miebach, use these facilities to showcase products and services across MasterCard. I was working on these physical spaces when COVID hit. So all of a sudden, you have to go from a physical, tactile environment to a virtual, digital environment and still try to give that same immersive and interactive environment. So I won't touch too much on kind of how we sold the vision and how it pivoted once we went into COVID. But I will just say that the closer to the top you are, the more runway you have and the more support you have, and especially if what
Mm.
you're delivering can continue to be a topic that's discussed and showcased, whether it is physical or virtual, by your leadership team, the better off you're going to be. And
Mhm.
so that's not always easily achieved, but the more value you can continue to show to the leadership, even if it's not bottom line value, even if it is just intellectual value, the better off. So I'll jump to Goldman Sachs, where I was working on a product and a program called the Financial Cloud. The concept was that we wanted to take the back end plumbing of financial services and the various aspects of that Goldman powered for itself, and externalize those via API or a developer site to clients. And the idea was take a financial services business and allow a technology arm that could also generate revenue. I always hearkened it back to AWSify Goldman Sachs, figure out how, the API of everything. And so when I had joined, Goldman was just ramping up its focus specifically on a division it had called Marquee within their global markets division, where they were going to expose the ability to very quickly create time series databases. And what was very successful about that initiative was that it was focused. It was focused on a specific customer group, and it was focused on a specific division. And there was the one leader of this within that global markets division was a brilliant individual who understood the funding cycles similar to venture capital and said, give me $5 million and see what I can do with it over the first 12 months. And if I can get X type of growth that's similar to an early stage growth cycle, then give me more funding and fund me like you would a startup organization. But I'm going to be in the belly of the beast. I'm going to be in this institution. And so you can continue to advise me, oversee and advise kind of the decisions that we're making. And so once again, I think here is the selling of, here's a metric, here's how I want to be evaluated. Fund me based on if we are hitting our numbers or not. If not, get rid of me. And
Mm.
I thought that was another great sales tactic. Now, granted, this came from a person who had already had a lot of wins under their belt, and so they
Okay.
could be entrusted. They were also a managing director who was on track for a partner level seat within the organization, which is the highest you can go essentially. So it was already somebody who had kind of entrenched themselves. And so they had the trust that they could get that funding, but they also were willing to take the risk. And now, not everyone's willing to do that, but they were willing to take the risk and say, hey, give me X amount of dollars or X amount of headcount that I can go ahead and deliver this solution. So when I came on, the idea was, one, how do we propel this into the public sphere? And then two, how do we then democratize this? How do we get that same type of thinking across the organization? And
Mm.
so the first thing was we decided we were going to launch this new product at AWS reInvent. And we were able to have Andy Jassy on the opening stage talk about this partnership between AWS and Goldman Sachs. And so earlier with Citibank, I talked about the halo effect. Once again, higher up in the organization you can get, the more halo effect that you can get from another organization that is already winning in the market in a place that you want to transition yourself into is really beneficial. Now, you can't always do that. That's sometimes very hard to get. And so the other thing I would take from this is the focus, that they focused on one, or we focused on one part of the division, the organization, and said, how can we win for this customer base in this area? And picked out something that really was industry defining as far as being able to offer these time series databases to process and analyze data very quickly. That really, when you looked out into the market, there was no one who was really winning in that space or held a large piece of market share. So once again, large, as much as you can, large big bang effect, if you can, either at a conference or an event. If you can get that halo effect, get it. Focus if possible. And the other place is look in the market and say, where is there an opportunity to be competitive either with our current clients, our current competitors, excuse me, or go into, what's typically called a blue ocean, and see if we can just go win in a brand new market. And so one of the things that was really successful about this was the ability to sell the opportunity, speak about it publicly, and then see, based on the market reaction, should we continue to build out these tools and functionality. And fortunately, we were able to launch and announce at AWS reInvent. The stock actually went up based on this announcement.
Wow.
And over the response that we got from the market, we had over 200 inquiries, and of those, I want to say 30% of them were of the like top 5 or top 10 targeted businesses in multiple different divisions across Goldman Sachs. So it really showed that there was appetite from our target market as
Mhm.
well, and the top organizations in our target market. And so then what I did from that point forward is set up a monthly meeting with the heads of engineering across, and this is partner level individuals, including the CEO and CTO of the engineering division, so that we had horizontal communication and vertical communication of how are we now going to reach across the different departments, different businesses within Goldman Sachs, and create this same sort of excitement and notoriety. And then where do we find where else we can win in the market? And so that will be the other thing that I would suggest you take, that you try and implement is once you get a win, figure out how you can sustain that win by getting the buy-in of these other large players within your organization.
Mm.
And if you can set up that routine monthly check-in, then you're getting that visibility and you're getting that feedback. And once again, like I was talking about in Citibank, other people want to raise their hand then. They want to be a part of it. They want to be the person who said, "Oh, I helped carry this initiative, this idea forward." And so the more excitement and notoriety you can develop around it, even internally, the more success and the more runway you're going to be given as well.
Fantastic. I think that's really good advice. So what about Moody's?
Yes, so Moody. So speaking of innovation, and corporate innovation is sometimes thrown around at times now as a dirty word. Even myself was a little bit trepidatious of staying just in this broad corporate innovation space. And so I slowly progressed more into focus around product and product management and product ownership. And how do you build a product? Scrum, Agile, how do you institute these certain practices and this mindset? And so now at Moody's, I run product over a lending product within Moody's Analytics. And what I find is exciting from an innovation standpoint is actually the way in which we gather customer feedback right now. And I would say that there are real opportunities where we can improve upon this. And looking back at some of the other organizations that I've worked at, the feedback loop with customers hasn't always been as strong. And so I think I'm at the point now where I realize that we have to set up processes where customer feedback comes in very succinctly, and then you have an ability as a product owner to make a decision on it. And so
Mm,
whether you're a product owner or you're an innovation, how are you getting feedback from your target market and your customers? And your
so
customers could be internal or you could be external. And how are you making decisions based on that? How are you logging that information? And so it's as much about a process innovation of making sure that you have the tools and communication in place, in addition to the ideas and implementation that you're trying to deliver on.
is there like, is there a charge or is there pushback on that process? Or do you feel like people are embracing
So I guess I should have spent more time on all the places I failed versus where I've been
it?
successful in this, because it's hard, because it's not just your one team then. It
Right.
is it is a it is an organization change to have your client services or your customer success recognize that you're responsible indirectly for revenue. You're responsible indirectly for client retention. If a client health is poor, even if you've only been responsible for one client complaint, that you've needed to shepherd through, or the client is unhappy with the product, it's not solely on product's shoulders. It might be they don't know how to use the product. It might be they do know how to use it and they submit bugs, but those don't ever get to product. And so product never solves their problems.
Mm,
So there is sometimes a communication feedback loop that gets lost between your customer, either current or potential, and the people building something. And this could be a new idea, an innovation department idea. This could be something core to your business. And so this is where when I talk about like process innovation or process enhancements, it's how do you use the tools that everyone already lives in, whether it's Salesforce or Jira or Confluence or ServiceNow? How do you use the tools that are already in place to accelerate that feedback loop so that you know that the decisions that you're making to pave the way for the next feature enhancement or new idea are actually aligned with your customer? And the more data that you have, the more support you can build around why this idea should be funded. And this is where, when you talk about institutions ingesting innovation throughout the organization, this is what it means, is it's everybody's responsibility to think, how can I do this job better? How can I, what is the client not satisfied with today? And maybe it's not my job to fix it, but it might be my job to elevate that this is a problem to the
mm,
people who then will come up with the solution. And that's where I think that more data you have, that's the final piece here. Is if you go talk to leadership and you say, I have an idea, but then you have no data to support it, it's the idea is going to fall flat, even if you have a close relationship, even if it's a great idea. And so that's kind of the final linchpin here of the big marketing, blow, shout outs and the representation and the halo effect is if you don't have the underlying data that supports why this innovation is the right direction, then everything else really doesn't fit together very nicely.
true. And in storytelling, we use a process and understanding this called the shift. And the shift is kind of a demarcating line where you say, there's a shift happening in the world right now, and you define the world as big or as narrow as you need to. And if we don't address the shift, we will lose. And on either side of this shift, there are winners and losers. And I guarantee you that the status quo is the loser. That's your argument as the innovator to make to the listener. And then on the other side of this is we know we can win because, and we cite examples from other organizations that are already doing this, or at least taking steps in that direction. And we use data to prove that the shift is real and that the direction that we're proposing is the right one. And that's where we include data. It's very early in the storytelling process before we ever discuss our solution. We use this shift mechanism to point out the consequences of not listening to the data. And it's so important in telling that story to get that right up front in order to get other people on the board at least agreeing that there's a problem and that it needs to be addressed. And that comes with like some gravitas, some urgency, and showing your audience that you have real critical thinking behind the concept, that it's not, you know what I think would be great? Ugh. That is a mechanism for self-destruction right there.
Positioning something as winning and losing is an effective persuasion tactic, versus what you suggested, which you're absolutely right. I hear this all the time. I've got an idea. What would be interesting, versus data-driven decision making. And I think when you can position it as winning and losing, which people viscerally, especially high achievers, viscerally feel the losing. I
Mhm.
remember Bill Belichick used to say he likes winning. He hates losing. He hates it. If you position it as such, you find that you get the needle to move a lot quicker.
Amen. Well, I'm going to leave it there, Alex, but I do have to ask you the 3 questions I ask all of my guests who come onto the show. So, number 1, what is the greatest innovation of all time?
I mean, the easy answer is the wheel, but I'm going to say one that I think is going to be the downfall of society is social media.
Mm. So it's the greatest, but not necessarily great.
Yes, it's infamous, right?
I've always wondered why we let a guy like Mark Zuckerberg, who has questionable social skills, to design our social interactions, and why we've conformed to interacting the way that we have. But so be it. So that's number 1. Number 2 is, if you had the opportunity to join any innovation team in history, which team would you have joined?
Bell Labs.
Bell Labs, yes. So many amazing innovations coming out of there. It's like a innovation factory. Great answer. And lastly, if there's something that you could innovate that either drives you crazy or you simply wish existed on the planet, what would that be?
Teleportation. Time is our most valuable asset. And Mark Cuban actually said when he made his first $1 billion, the first thing he did is buy a private jet. And everyone's like, wow, that's such a stupid investment. And how does somebody who made such a few, or not a few, many smart investments make such a dumb one? And what he said is time is so valuable to him. And he realized if he could just go hop on a jet and be somewhere else in 6 hours or 5 hours, why not do that? So
So the closest thing to a teleportation device us mere mortals have today.
yes,
And if you're going to Asia, you're practically going to different times anyway. You're going forward or back in time
exactly.
from the US. Alex Trotta, if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
LinkedIn, I'm pretty sure it's still /AK Trotta, but just reach out to me. Also, my email, aktrotta@gmail.com. I've reach out if you want to chat. I make time for anyone I can help.
Fantastic. Alex, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
Cool. Thank you so much, Susan.